Good evening. I think we should start. My name is David Mnyai. I'm the director for the Center for Africa-China Studies here at University of Johannesburg. I think I'll start by inviting Professor Victoria Graham, my boss, to do the opening. Professor Victoria Graham is the Senior Director, Strategic Initiatives and Administration at the University of Johannesburg. She obtained her PhD in Political Studies at UJ in 2013. Her research interests lie in the area of democracy, studies particularly the quality of democracy, African small islands, developing states, comparative politics and South African democracy and development. In 2015, her book entitled Press of Fail, Assessing the Quality of South Africa's Democracy was published. Professor Graham is also passionate about the active citizenship and development as part of a community engagement and engagement in South Africa, an NPO that offers leadership and civil education through its Voice program. In 2020, Professor Graham became the Executive Director of Consortium for Regional Integration, Social Cohesion, Elevation, an academic body that seeks to promote regional integration to address socio-ecological vulnerability across the world. Professor Graham.
Thanks so much, Prof. Monyai. So I'd like to start by saying, on behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Leclerc, George and Pedi, I welcome you all to the great University of Johannesburg, because that's how we refer to UJ these days. So welcome all of you to the great University of Johannesburg. Today is a special day. It's tinged with both sadness and happiness, a day characterized by a sense of immense achievement, actually, by the Center for Africa-China Studies under the directorship of Prof. Monyai here, but also a sense of loss. South Africa woke up to the news that Mavuso Msimang, Deputy President of the African National Congress Veterans League, has resigned from the party after more than 60 years. And this is probably a fitting place to start today's book launch. The presentations and discussions that will follow today will mostly center on ESSOP PAHAD and the African National Congress. To read his memoirs is to get a glimpse of the complicated but rich tapestry of South African politics generally, but also straddling significant and defining portions of the 20th and 21st century. A Life Committed is a befitting title to describe a life that was zealously committed to eliminating injustice in Africa and the world. PAHAD writes about his childhood with wistful nostalgia, but also writes about how what was supposed to be an ordinary transition to adulthood was violently robbed of him by a brazenly racist system that sneered on people who looked like him. Forced into exile, PAHAD and thousands more like him had to live a life of stealth, a life that compelled him to create a bigger exile family, one that decades later would play a part in constructing a post-apartheid Africa and South Africa. While the ANC, the party to which he belonged up to his sad passing on the 6th of July this year, started off as a non-violent and gentleman's organization that unwittingly fitted the dominance of apartheid, PAHAD came into his own at the time when the ANC had renounced its futile attempt to be naively reasonable with an irrational edifice. The confrontational brand of political activism that Nelson Mandela and his colleagues had chosen after the Sharpeville bloodbath in 1961, with the establishment of Umkhonto we Sizwe, suited PAHAD's personality. As Ronnie Casserols will probably narrate for us during his remarks, ESSOP was a firebrand who did not shrink in the face of apartheid violence, and he gave as much as he got. In the years when he served as minister in the presidency of his longtime friend Thabo Mbeki, he brought with him some of the radicalism and intensity, which was both a result of temperament and decades of communist persuasion and exile as an ANC apparatchik. In the pages of his memoirs, one will find a story of triumph over adversity. In short, a story that reflects ESSOP's life. With 561 pages, this tome is an outspoken and candid report card on South Africa through its dark days of apartheid, the heady days of the Mandela presidency, the years of the Thabo Mbeki presidency, during which ESSOP was a central cog in augmenting South Africa's stature in the developing world and putting the country on an even economic keel to the watershed moment of Polokwane in 2007. Polokwane, PAHAD writes, marked a turning point for the worst in the history of the ANC and for our democratic government. That conference paved the way for charlatans, opportunists, factionalists, and sectarians to insert themselves into the heart of the movement, all spheres of government. When one looks at the extensive impact that the ANC has had on South Africa, one would be tempted to substitute South Africa for the word government. I am deeply pained and disappointed, PAHAD writes towards the end of the book, that my beloved ANC is consumed by debilitating factionalism and sectarianism. Nevertheless, PAHAD remained a loyal, committed, and disciplined member and leader of the ANC. This demonstrates a hope for a better South Africa, especially as we head towards the crucial elections of 2024, when our country will be commemorating 3 decades of a democratic order. Our democracy is an estimable treasure that we should all protect jealously. To his last day, this is what ESSOP tried to communicate and to live out. In his final years, he remained as defiant and hopeful as ever, in the face of terminal lung cancer that was diagnosed in March this year. It's very sad that he passed away on the 6th of July, when this book was already with the publishers. It would have been a wrenching experience if he'd left us without having finished his manuscript. Thus, even in his death, ESSOP challenged his comrades, he challenges still his comrades, who are reluctant to chronicle their own lives, which offer examples and lessons for South Africa and the whole world. The University of Johannesburg was honored to be associated with ESSOP PAHAD. He graciously accepted to be the founding board chairperson of the Center for Africa-China Studies. He used that position to offer counsel, example, and to contribute towards the center's research output, as demonstrated in this important book. I would like to acknowledge here this evening also Meg, ESSOP's wife, who typed the manuscript and made more contributions to the text. To Amina, his daughter, Gavin's son, and Nassim, his surviving brother, the grandchildren and the extended PAHAD family, everyone, for their contribution to South Africa and for allowing ESSOP the freedom to be who he was and what he was. The Center for Africa-China Studies, as acknowledged in the book by ESSOP himself, encouraged him to finish the manuscript and prepare it for publication. Appreciation also goes to Angela McClellan, who edited the manuscript, and also to Ridwan Valley at Real African Publishers, who took up the manuscript and published with alacrity when he was approached at very short notice. In closing, may I thank Ronnie Casserols, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, and Oscar van Heerden, who will be our main speakers for this launch. And thank you to all of you here in the room this evening and to many of those joining us online. I now hand back to Professor Monyai, who will direct the rest of the proceedings. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof. I think the big question that I was asked to, where does the Center for Africa-China Studies fit in the book? So I'll just explain briefly that and just give key, rules of the game for this session. And then I think it's an evening of discussions about the book and those who were very close to him to have conversation. So we tried by all means not to make it too academic and make it much more exciting evening. So the Comrade PAHAD, Dr. PAHAD, I think for most of us, personally, I first met him in early 90s doing my undergraduate at Wits University. Those were the days when we were preparing for elections. He came to address us, and as a student, one was intimidated to see the giant speaking. We had read a lot about him. I didn't know much about him, but then followed his entire career in cabinet and in so many other places. So in that period, I didn't have any personal link with him. At a personal level, I think it came after Polokwane 2006 and the formation of the Concerned African Forum, which I'm a member. So at that level, I literally became one of his drivers. And in driving him home in meetings, I got to know the man deeply in terms of the discussions, the counsel, and get to understand him much more at a personal level. I think it was quite humbling. I think one of the key issues that really touched me was something that is also very personal. My parents were domestic workers, and he was describing how in the 60s he used to write letters for those coming from township, going home, not to be harassed by the police. And we discussed a number of issues, of which time does not allow me to talk more about that. Institutionally, and where the book comes directly, has to do with an agenda which was set by the university to produce books by leaders across the board in society. And quite a number that are books that are out, and an understanding that most of our leaders are leaving a huge vacuum when they pass away. We look at Comrade Alfred Nzo. I haven't seen any book. Comrade Joe Modise, there's no book. And a number of them, we don't see books. And that for us as the university, we thought that we could bring in leaders from all levels, rural, urban areas, in the leadership, political, in business, to come to university and try to archive these books, as to archive them. I think the lesson academically, if you look, particularly in the United States and most Western countries, stories are told about institutions that we all know, and the history of ANC is quite clear. But at times we miss a lot if we don't record individual history, look at history from different lenses, individual, those who are in the room, they do matter. And in this case, I think we are driven by that agenda, that we need to stop burning libraries, not literally, but when elders pass away, we see that they are living libraries. So I think that's what drove us. So as I was discussing with a comrade ESSOP, one of the days I found him with all his papers on the table, and he's writing with a handwriting on a paper. And I asked I'm working on a book. So I was so fascinated. I thought he's well organized, and the publishers and every infrastructure of a book is there. But the more I asked, I realized he didn't have an infrastructure. He didn't have any proofreaders, and there was no publisher. And that's where we came in. In any way, he was part of our center as the chair of our advisory board, and later a senior distinguished fellow. It is in that context that we came to work with him, and Meg, and his children, and so many other supporting people who were there. Ridwan, we approached Ridwan, the proofreader, and we worked quite last minute, working very closely with him. And we thought he would see the book, as has already been mentioned. Unfortunately, he did not. But the cover, he did see it. He played a critical role in choosing that wonderful photo with Meg that did all the photo selections that are in the book. So that's the role that we played as university. And our wish is that this piece of work will live in our library. It will be online, it will be read, and the book brings a very important angle that is missing in so many books that are being written, particularly on the role of left movements across the world. I haven't seen a book that captures that element. I think he did his best. His life in Prague and so many other places where he brings progressive voices, particularly on Palestine and other Latin America, Russia, and China, that we were very closely working with him on. So I think these are just my few words as where we fit in. And now I'm back to the role of the chair. I would encourage the speakers. We're slightly flexible, but 10 minutes is our target. I'm not sure, Comrade Ronnie, you'll meet that, but I'll do the best I can. I'll do the best I can. 15 minutes and so that in a much more flexible. So I'll start in that, I think it's in order, with Comrade Ronnie. His bio doesn't need much of, but let me do it since it's a standard of reading. Comrade Ronnie Castro is a South African politician, Marxist revolutionary, guerrilla and military commander. He was Minister of Intelligence Services from 27 April 2004 to 25 September 2008. Castro was a lifelong friend of Comrade ESSOP PAHAD. They worked closely together in the long years of exile and served for many years in top structures of both the ANC and SACP, and later in government from 1994 to 2008, resigning in September 2008. They both were actively involved in Palestinian solidarity in their entire adult lives. Castro is the author of several books about South African liberation struggle. I'll just end here. And this is just a short. I can make it. Comrade.
Thanks. Well, I'd better get onto it very quickly. I was going to read a bit from this book, but I've been warned. Well, first of all, Prof, it's wonderful to be in the great University of Johannesburg, but it is wonderful to be here for the great ESSOP PAHAD. So those two go well together. And it's marvelous to see such a wonderful gathering here and absolutely extraordinary friends, extraordinary, who loved him and he loved them back. I'm not talking about matrimony or out of that. The love of a revolutionary. He loved his comrades. And if you argued with him, he loved you even more, which is why I just miss him so much, and the disagreements and the arguments. But with ESSOP, and we've said this so often, I've never met somebody who you could argue with and both skulk away. But the next day, while you were still skulking, he would see you and he'd say, "Hey, Sugo, Wena, come here." He never carried any of that baggage at all. And to quite a degree, he was misunderstood in that sense. But when we look back at an absolute wonderful life, we realize what a gentle giant he was, and how the love of humanity, of human beings, of sitting down on a bench in Moscow or in Prague or outside a conference at the United Nations, you'll see in this book, he loved nothing better than to sit and just observe humanity. And there was the occasion, you'll read the beautiful anecdotes in this book, where he's sitting in Moscow. He's very young and new to the place. Later on, he knew it back to front. But he's new, and it's cold, and he's sitting on a bench, and nearby is one of these dreadful, seedy Moscow pubs, nothing like you have in London, which he knew so well, but a place where, and we've seen it so often, where the underclass used to go with their kopecks and fill up their beer at the taps. Awful stuff, by the way. And we loved Moscow and we loved the Soviet Union. You'll see it in this book. But he's there and he's observing humanity. And he notices that these kind of gnarled, tough-looking guys underclass elements, and have seen them myself, and you would absolutely walk away, but he's watching, and he recounts how there's this one guy pacing up and down, he's dying for vodka, and he's looking, and there are other guys coming, and he spots them, and ESSOP explains in wonderful prose how the man does this, holds up 3 fingers, no speaking. One guy comes over, another guy comes over. There are 3 of them. They disappear into the beer hall, and they come out, and and they go away. No word, no dos vidania, no smiles, just people passing in the night or the morning, actually. And then his interpreter finally arrives. And ESSOP explains, he says, what were these guys doing? And before he's asked the question, there are another 3 guys, also the sign, the 3 fingers, no speech between them. They don't know each other. 1, 2, 3, and they go in. And it's explained to ESSOP, these guys, they can't afford a bottle of vodka, but they can afford the Copex, 1/3 of the bottle. So you need 3. You've got to get together, and that's the sign. 3, I'm looking for 2 more, 3. And he takes ESSOP into that very dingy place. And ESSOP sees the trios. They at the place where you're putting down the rubles, 3 rubles, whatever, 1 from each, and they get a bottle, and they get 3 cups, and they share it out. They just raise it, knock it back, and walk away. And ESSOP says that we can go to the Lenin School, we can study the books, we can learn from the political class and the workers in the factories and the peasants in the fields, but you must sit and watch what happens in society to know the contradictions and the ups and downs. So I'm a bit of a salesman here. He's asked me to make sure that we buy this book. And you see, in this book, of course, you will find so much, such a variety, a rich variety. And in relation to that, the absolute multifold basis of ESSOP PAHAD, in relation to his shaping, this book is a marvel. So I've got the easier part. You see, I'm the senior of these 3 by age, not intellect, not wisdom or anything, but age. So I bossed them. I spoke to Geraldine to get her agreement first, and then to Oscar just to tell him what we had decided. And it was easy. I said, hey, but Geraldine, I knew ESSOP when we were both just out of our teens in 1961. I was down in Durban, although from here, that's where I became involved in politics, and I came up and met him. So I can easily start from there, and then, of course, it's exile, and that goes through Prof to 1990. I had actually left London and was in Africa, but I said to Geraldine, hey, you know, Geraldine, I'll take that part, and then you've got the hard part, you see. They come back and they set up the office of the Communist Party. She'll take it from there. And then, of course, to Oscar, the intellectual Van Heerden, I said to him, okay, Oscar, you get to know ESSOP much later with the thinker and all of these things. You can finish off, Prof, with all the academic stuff, the high-level intellectualism. Okay, so what can I say now in a few minutes to go? That to understand ESSOP PAHAD is magic, and it teaches one the importance of family, of roots. And he was so proud and so fortunate in terms of that family background. His mother, Amina, their namesake, was one of these incredible South African women, so strong, who defied the police, who was in prison, who welcomed that generation of Sisulu, Madiba, Kathrada into the Baker Street flat. To read about that origin is to understand so much of South Africa. He was so fortunate, and little brother Aziz, Angela, your love of your life, who's absolutely there at his side. I found it, and you'll find it, so beguiling and enchanting. And let me say this, in a country such as ours today, where we're battling to reignite the non-racism, the multiracial dimension of Communist Party, ANC, society, how this young boy from Srazendrenica owes so much to the Indian community. And you can see his pride in this little organization. I mean, it was about 100 times bigger than the organization I belong to, the Congress of Democrats, all 21 of us around the country, but the Transvaal Indian Youth Congress, and how much he gained from that. So in relation to my input, the book shows you the fusion of community, of national struggle, and of the working class and proletarian internationalism. And yes, ESSOP, I remember the time talking about Palestine, ESSOP, when I talked about international solidarity. And he pipes in, Ronnie, proletarian internationalism, that's where it begins. And then talk about the broader international solidarity, chiding me with his big finger. I can hear it still. But what this book is dealing with in relation to national struggle, the national question, and how he fuses that with internationalism and international solidarity. And what ESSOP shows, it's almost as though with the Transvaal Indian Youth Congress, where he, and I don't have the time, I was going to read, it's so beautiful, where he actually talks about learning from Kathrada and Mosi Mula about internationalism. And it's in his blood. And he begins to understand the world that we have to change, and that our major contribution is changing our own society, and how he fuses that. And he fast forward to ESSOP, PAHAD, and little brother Aziz coming into exile and being recruited into the Communist Party in London, where we were setting up the units in exile. And it's such a marvelous passage. He's ecstatic when he is recruited into the Communist Party. We know, and you'll read it in the book, how he's involved with the Communist Party of Britain, the anti-apartheid movement. He's sent around the world. He's sent to Moscow. He sees the vodka drinkers. That's when he first goes to Lenin's school. But then we come to the PAHAD family in Prague and the 10 years there with the World Marxist Review. And this guy is not a person at all who shrinks like a violet in the face of revolutionaries twice his age and the ones from Moscow. And that was very daunting, because we were like the devotees of Christendom, Frank Ciccani, who goes to Rome, and we meet the Pope and the big bishops. And if you go to Moscow and you're going to meet these guys, it's the same kind of thing. But when we were together, PAHADs, my late wife, Eleanor, and we had a holiday. You from Prague, me from Africa, and Eleanor from London. And we meet up in Hungary at Lake Balaton. And there are World Marxist Review mighties playing tennis, playing table tennis, swimming. No one could beat ESSOP PAHAD at the table tennis, not even me. And I used to get ahead of him, 17-15. I was telling Amina the other night, do you remember? She couldn't. I was ahead of him, 17-15, 18-13. He would put in such a grand slam and he would kill me, 21-19 every time. And he was killing all of the big gurus from the World Marxist Review and giving them such cheek. And I saw him put down one of the guru of gurus on the tennis court, coming to watch me because I'm also a tennis player and he wasn't. And we had a game, several games, with this guy from the World Marxist Review, a guru out of Moscow. And the two Hungarian youngsters who were interpreters were playing, one with me, the other on the other guy's side, on the guru's side. And when they made an error, he would scream and carry on until Mr. Comrade ESSOP PAHAD, booming voice, "Hey, Boris, you're not at the bloody Central Committee meeting bossing everybody around. Shut up and get on with the game." He stood up to anything and anybody. Read this book. The pictures are superb. Redawan, you have really put together a wonderful book. The family aspect of ESSOP PAHA's life, the friendships, the people from around the world, Henry Winston, Don Soko, Good Luck, all these African giants, Latin America, Caribbean, Britain, France, Philippines, Vietnam, Britain, Soviet Union. It's peopled, this book is peopled with them. And he gives the most wonderful portraits, but he gives the most wonderful portraits as well of the foot soldiers. So let me end with Ariana. Where's Ariana? She's a great historian, and I've learned quite a bit from her in our interactions. So there's an element here which shows ESSOP PAHAD's absolute warmth about humanity. And it's the footnotes, but it's also the fact that in a book, and when I wrote my first book, Prof, Armed and Dangerous, and I gave the first manuscript, was to Heinemann, were the first publishers, and they got back to me, and I'd had a section of my youth in Yeovil, and I put in the names of all my chums. There were one or two who were warranted, like Ali Bacha and somebody else, and they said to me, "Look, Ronnie, you're not doing a family album, so don't mention Ivor Lazason and Stoffel van der Merwe or whatever. They can go in the footnotes." So fine, you do that. You can read ESSOP, he defies that, because ESSOP PAHAD would not miss a person's name. And he wouldn't just put it in the footnote. So he comes to everyone in the Transvaal Indian Youth Congress, or he comes to everybody on the editorial board in London of the African Communist from start to finish, so there are like 50 names. He comes to a camp where there's commanders and commissars and instructors, and he'll give you every name. We've got some commissars here today. Tabang Makwetla, who was the commander of a camp with him. And you'll read there all of the names. And I can hear ESSOP saying to the publisher, "Suga Wena, everyone here is important. I'm not relegating them to the footnote." Now, all I want to say in relation to that is it doesn't get in the way. If you are from MK or you served on the editorial board or you were in some particular structure, you want to see that name. He didn't forget me. He elevates everybody. If you're wanting to run through the book and you're not so interested, Ronnie Kaka, he mentions you so often, including in the football games in London, where ESSOP supported Leeds United. Why? Because it was the first team in Britain that had a black player, and he was a South African, and that was 10 years before he came. ESSOP phones me one day, not long ago, "Hey, Ronnie, I'm thinking of supporting your team, Arsenal." I say, yes, ESSOP, because you see, it's Saturday afternoon, I'm watching the game, and he's watching it, and I know what he's going to say to me, because that day, Arsenal fielded almost a total team of black players. So I said to him, yes, so because we got so many black players. He says, yes, you've got 10 out of 11. No, ESSOP, we've got 11. No, you're a man, there's one white guy. I said to him, ESSOP, PAHAD. The white guy is Egyptian. You're talking about the goalkeeper. Oh, my God. Okay, ESSOP, they're going to buy your book. What I was going to do, coming in with all the heavy stuff about ESSOP, the national question, internationalism, and so on. But he puts it across in an absolutely outstanding way in terms of clarity and depth and insight. And therefore, since ESSOP placed proletarian internationalism, international solidarity at his root in relation to our struggle, to Africa, to the national question, and so on, what he writes and says about that is absolutely intrinsic to what we face today. And Prof, you mentioned Palestine, and ESSOP would be saying that Palestine is at the center of a struggle for world peace, for national determination, for international solidarity, for standing up for justice against an imperialist monster out of the USA and its particular running dogs. Those who know Mao Zedong will know where that phrase comes from. And ESSOP was certainly not a Maoist, but obviously I'm talking about the tools and the instruments around the world of the neo-colonial powers and the powers that represent and have the impunity to kill people and genocidal. ESSOP would be so angry and to the fore in terms of the theory and the practice. And this is where I'll show off my intellectualism, because he would talk about, Prof, the 11th theory of Feuerbach, okay? The 11th. And that is what drove ESSOP's life. And what Karl Marx says in that particular issue with Feuerbach, and his 11th thesis is the philosophers hitherto have attempted to interpret the world, but the point is to change it. He was theoretician and praxis. And when he produced The Thinker, we saw how he brought all of that together. I hope I came in under 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. You did well. Our next speaker, comrade Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, is the chair of the Nelson Mandela University, chairperson of the Thabo Mbeki Board of Trustees, chair of the Committee of Experts on Public Administration, an expert body of the UN and Social Council, led independent director of EXARO, non-executive board member. It's quite long. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Same floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Good evening. I'm not sure which one is the mic, and I'm not the tallest person. ESSOP is not in the room, so, difficulties there. I take exception, David. You introduce Comrade Ronnie as this lifelong revolutionary, and you start the introduction on me around everything corporate and elsewhere. And I do want to say that I met Comrade ESSOP in the 80s. And then Comrade Ronnie, I was in MK and the ANC at that point in time. But I think a significant recollection is, of course, the party congress, the last underground congress of the South African Communist Party in 1989, that's right, in Cuba. And there's a reference to that here as well. So yes, we had resolved that we were going to tackle different parts of the book, and we were going to divide it according to periods or eras, if we can call it that. But the book is also written thematically, and I think you've got to weave your way through it. And I thought that I should lift certain parts and actually read some parts from the book as well to encourage you. But it's not easy coming up after Comrade Ronnie. I mean, he's really taken the stage. And for me to try and compete with that is not going to be the simplest. So I'll leave out certain things, but I wanted to start with a lighter part that actually defies what we agreed on, Comrade Ronnie, and that's the part on, is it Culvert, yeah? Where the family originally comes from. So I'm told, Megna, I know there were certain things that you always said to me, there's one word you must never say in public, and never in front of family. So I'm not going to use that word tonight. But I am going to take you to the village, because I'm told that ESSOP in some ways used to bring or make himself sort of the focal point of everyone from there in some respects. And you see that come through in the book. And that's the fact that in family circles or in the clan circle or the village circle, because there's a point when there's a blurring between is it family or is just everyone who comes from that village in India. I'm told they used to boast in closed circuits, and this I heard from one of the members, so it's not third hand. I'm told they boasted that the first communists came from there, and of course we know that Doc Dadu came from there, but also that the first drunkard came from that village. I didn't say so, it was said so, and I'm told ESSOP said that. I'm not going to try and pinpoint the drunkard. And there were a number of other firsts, but I would encourage you to read to get to these firsts. What was also fascinating about the book, and again it's me going off script a little bit, is the references to Meg. We don't always make that reference, because the integral part of ESSOP and Meg is the fact that Meg joined the Communist Party of the United Kingdom in 1971, I think, yes, after the death of Ahmed Timol. And in her joining the party, you also see the connections with a number of people around that. And this shows the linkages into the communist movement in the UK that Ronnie spoke about. And it's spelled out in this book. And I thought that I should raise that, because it also, if you fast forward, and ESSOP clearly depicts the fact that he defied, and Meg raised this at the time of the funeral of Comrade ESSOP, and in discussions, or I don't know, I think Amina raised it. ESSOP never made a commitment to his in-laws that he was going to take care of Meg financially. And that also comes through in the book, and he talks about his clear defiance thereof. But Meg goes into the area of education. And if you look at the UK, she worked in quite tough neighborhoods and tough schools. She then comes back to South Africa, and it states it in the book, where when she comes and she says she's a primary school teacher, everyone looks at her and thinks she's pretty underqualified. Because, you see, nobody looks at the importance of education and primary education. But because Meg is Meg, and she's with someone like ESSOP, she thought she better go and do a master's in order to prove that this is not a lesser area of work. So thought I'd point that out as well. But then on the last of my digressing, I want to go to the Congress School. And I think if you look at the parts on the Congress School, and you look at a play that was put on. So ESSOP and them attended the Congress School, and they put on a play at that school. And when you read the persons who participated in the play, and I've got the page numbers written down here, but I'm just putting this out as a teaser for you to go and read the book. The participants in that play reads like the who's who of the Congress movement in that particular, at that particular time. But it also talks about what that Congress school did in terms of, shall I say, preparation of leadership in our country, but also people who are really amongst those that we count in as forming part of the annals of our struggle, but also part of this glorious movement of ours. Now let me fast forward to the part that I'm supposed to talk about and deal with that a little bit. And I'm going to jump a bit because I see a sister of mine in the room here, and I go to a part where ESSOP, and this is ESSOP Mint ESSOP. He actually publishes notes that we shared in Parliament and in Cabinet. Now, I mean, some of them are not the kind of things that I ever thought anyone would expose. So I'm going to read some of them to you, because I was really astounded, Meg, when I read this, and I thought, damn, how could he do that, you know? So he says, another person with whom I exchanged regular notes was Minister Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi. Neither she nor Trevor sat particularly close to me, so we clearly enjoyed exchanging views on a range of topics. Below, I reproduce a sample of these, so you can imagine what the ones are like that he didn't include. And one of the notes I said, sent, and I'll go to some of it, where I said, on a different note, we're launching the census of the public service project in Kinshasa tomorrow. Kabila will be involved. This is one of our biggest projects. One note. And then there's another instance where he spoke in Parliament, and I said, you did speak a bit too long, but you raised important issues, so thank you for that. I'm going to jump others, and this is on page 443 of the book, if you have it with you. Now, this is the one that I didn't expect him to put in, one of the few. I had expected different conduct from you. It is not appropriate to act instinctively. If I wanted to share that information with Lindy, in brackets Sisulu, I would have sent it directly. I do not believe we have any more / anything to discuss. That's ESSOP. So then another quote. Now, ESSOP, don't be so short-tempered. I acknowledge that what you raised and merely tried to reflect that it was widespread, that it was even prevalent in the public service, and we attempted to remedy it. So smile and know your comrades and friends. It shows you that this book has important bits. But I think what's even more is it captures the detail of a history not only of South Africa and our struggle, but as was pointed out by Ronnie, the struggles internationally, because it reflects on his time in Prague. It talks about the struggles across the African continent. And I was quite intrigued that there were certain parts that Ronnie had raised that I had also captured. But what's more, it goes into the intricacies and the debates that raged within the South African Communist Party, not to mention the NEC. Fortunately, ESSOP spared us and didn't share the notes that were sent during those discussions in those meetings. Because as he states in this book, the Central Committee of the South African Communist Party took a decision at the last CC meeting before the return into the country, and this was in 1990. Actually, it was the 89 meeting. It was post the Cuba Congress. There was a decision taken that 4 comrades would return back into the country to work on the rebuilding of the South African Communist Party. And the decision taken was that ESSOP PAHAD, Jeremy Cronin, myself, and Jabu Moleketi would come back and work on the rebuilding. And I mean, it was not an easy situation to come into, and he touches on aspects of this. He also emphasizes the important ideological battles that took place, both within the party and within the NEC. And I think the likes of, and I see Tabanga sitting there, in addition to Comrade Lindy, they will recall some of these. Again, I was advised that I must be cautious about what I read out of this book this evening, because I may just reopen old struggles, and it may lead to new struggles, feed into new struggles coming to the fore. And one of it was what was referred to as some of the big debates at the time. Now, this is a comrade I happen to be very close to, and this is on page 490 in this book. and I quote, in his contribution, Moleketi characterized some COSATU resolutions as unsound, Comrade Ronnie, lacking a Marxist-Leninist theoretical approach, and at times descending into a vulgar application of that theory. He said that we cannot consider issues in the abstract, but rather have to do so in the national, specific, and distinct circumstances and conditions. In his assessment, the decision of the SACP to become a mass party movement meant that it would no longer be a party of the most advanced cadres, including those from the trade union movement. In that context, it would be difficult for the SACP to play the vanguard role in the political and economic spheres, and he warned against the phenomenon of tailism. He referred to the 1962 SACP program and the one adopted later in Cuba, which recognized the ANC as the leader of the tripartite alliance, close quotes. So again, it captures, and ESSOP captured, the debates at the time. And there's different comrades in this room and outside this room who were quite involved in the debates. I mean, one could go on to talk about the time in government and governance and the very active, challenging debates that took place there. Because not only did people come prepared with a memorandum that they had to present before cabinet on behalf of the department or sector they represented, but they came there having read all the documents because they knew that the presidents of the day had read all those documents and more. And not only because of the fact that it was read, but because there was a clear appreciation that our involvement was that of being privileged as pioneers and, shall I call it, the founding parents of the South African Constitution. We were here having to place a foundation for this democratic government, and we understood that. And we knew that came with a responsibility and clearly had a cost with it. And hence you have a situation today where there's a sense that there's fragmentation, that there's factionalism to an extent that it has even extended into governance and beyond. And that is a major problem. So I'd also encourage you to go to those parts in the book that reflects on the rift that was there within the ANC. And here you can look at page 498, that one could almost say was a palpable turning point in our history as a movement and as a country with the resignation of President Thabo Mbeki. And he writes with despair when he said, and I quote, within alliance structure, there was sowing of seeds on fertile soil, and the SACP and COSATU started wrongly accusing Mbeki without presenting any shred of evidence of undermining democratic processes in the ANC and government, close quotes. I again stop there because I want you to buy the book and read it. I want you to go to it and look at what's coming up. And in a way, it contextualizes this current moment. At one point in time when Thabo Thabang was still a real commissar, not what he is now, he would say the current conjuncture is reflected through what's come up there. So I think we need books like these. And I think you're right, David. I don't know where you're sitting. You probably, I have gone over time. I realize that. But nobody said to me, they said, Uncle Ronnie, you only have 15 minutes. They didn't say to me, you have as well. But to a large degree, it's books like these and the books that many others should write that captures a history that's been much unwritten. And everyone who's written different parts writes it through their lens and vantage point. And here, I think you have a lot of it brought together. Thanks, Meg, for giving me the opportunity to speak at this book review. You could have chosen many people and many in this room. But ESSOP and I shared different spaces over many periods. And I know that whenever I was angry with him in the party office, he had this long room, and I'd march in there and stand on the one side and said, you will not shout at me and that, and I will not shout at you either, but both of us were shouting because we wanted to make a point. And it was never personal. It was always around issues. And that's why in this book I also found it very interesting when he had his first teaching job. And he was put in the school in London where the whole class, I believe, they were all white, essentially, completely racist, didn't want this Pakistani, as they referred to him, to address them. And he said he had carefully selected explicit, swear words, you know. It was carefully selected when he addressed this crowd and eventually got them back. It's a very interesting story there. Now, I don't know how he carefully selected, because he always swore. It was only in front of his grandchildren he didn't, you know.
This is such a brilliant anecdote. It's wonderful. And I know I'm barging in. But you see, you know what he did to those thugs? Yes. And they were all white, and they were on day release. So they were really guys not interested. You had day release in England, you know, working in offices, factories. You could go, and he was doing liberal studies. So he's got to find out from them, what's your name, name. So the first guy says, I'm Jackie Charlton. You know, do you know football? Jackie Charlton. Okay. The next guy gives another football name. The next, 5 of them. So he says, okay, takes the names down. Yeah. And then you see, if you on day release, you get paid a certain amount. So it's the end of the week, and he's got to sign off. So he says, okay, got to sign off for you guys. Jackie Charlton, right, I need your signature. The guy says, oh my God, no, I'm actually James Finnegan. He says, no, I've got the name Jackie Charlton. See whether they pay you now. And that's how he controlled those buggers. Well done.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Oscar, it's your turn. Yeah. Dr. Oscar, a very close colleague, holds a PhD from Cambridge, is a former DVC at Fort Hare, and currently advisor to the Minister of COPTA. Please give us your version.
My account.
Yes.
I suspect, Geraldine, one of the things that me and ESSOP had in common was the swearing.
The swearing?
Yeah. Anyone who knows me will know that I swear like a trooper as well. Thank you for this opportunity. As has been indicated by my veterans, I will not compete at all. I will talk about ESSOP the intellectual and the academic, you know, to decide to, many of you will know that and appreciate that contributing to the body of knowledge is no small feat. Everyone, you meet many people, especially when you have a PhD. I also want to do a PhD. You know, I'm thinking of doing a PhD. But I don't think they really realize what it involves and what it takes out of your day-to-day life. So I think that when ESSOP, and he talks about it very eloquently, decided to do the PhD, I can just imagine how the time he must have spent to try and think about who is the appropriate supervisor. Because that's really, if you don't have the right supervisor, you're simply not going to enjoy doing a 3-year or a 4-year PhD. And how delighted he was that he finally was able to agree on someone that he respected intellectually. So besides the debates, and he speaks about this all the time in the book, you know, one of the things that you realize is that there was a lot of movement in London. When they arrived, they lived here, then they moved to there, and eventually they settled there. And of course, they also interacted with their friends and other comrades and stayed at their houses. And the one general thread that runs through all these homesteads is the continuous debates and arguments and, you know, engaging in umkhabulo and ideological arguments and so forth, because they certainly, although they were all in exile, they were certainly not of the same orientation, ideologically and otherwise. You had people who were more Africanist. They were more communist. These were people that were anti-Marxist-Leninism, and so on and so forth. But clearly, an ESSOP PAHAD that just loves being in the battle of ideas. And this runs through his entire life. When he joined the editorial board of the World Marxist Review, I mean, it must have been just a highlight in 1975, to be able to be at the pinnacle of where critical thinking is actually happening, specifically on an ideology that already was under threat and receiving pressures from all sides of the world, and that being communism in particular. Of course, he played his part within the African Communist, the official document of the SACP, Sichaba, and so forth. Every opportunity ESSOP could get to try and input and write a paper, to try and give some ideological direction, he would go for it. So that was the one part. The second part was, of course, he has a chapter on those who are his mentors, and Ronnie touched on some of this. And you just have to, a cursory observation will tell you that his mentors are thinkers. Dadu, Umgov, Mandela, Katrada, and many others. Yeah. So Umgov is someone that he respected, that he engaged with, and again, a seasoned communist. I think that even though there is a book, David, on him, I think that his contribution is it's downplayed far too little, quite honestly, in terms of the significant inroads and theoretical positions that he has contributed. And so, again, one can see that intellectualism and that hunger for ideas permeates through those that he saw as his mentors. And I think that when he reflects on those mentors, it's the first time, I must confess, where I've seen an autobiography that actually takes time to talk about individual mentors. I mean, it's actually quite nice to read, and I think you'll enjoy that part of the book as well. He writes, for example, and it's again something that revolutionary intellectuals struggle with, which is, and there might be some of you in the room, so I ask for forgiveness, but he writes about his irritation with the Trotskyites, and how he just was so frustrated with engaging with these permanent revolutionaries that talk of a permanent revolution as opposed to the National Democratic Revolution, of course, And so, Ronnie, you are right. Feuerbach, Marxist-Leninism, the 18th Brumaire, etc. These are all theoretical underpinnings that would have strengthened his argument against those that call themselves Trotskyites. And for those who might not know, these are people that subscribe to the writings of Leon Trotsky, who Stalin had executed. He ran to Mexico, but they found him and they put an ice pick in his head. I'm not suggesting that's what we do with Trots, but yeah. It comes therefore as no surprise that when the dust settles, he starts his own magazine, where he can really get the battle of ideas domestically and in terms of the continent of Africa actually permeate through the thinker. This university, of course, eventually takes over that magazine, and it's now a published publication. So for those, unlike at the times when I was writing, it wasn't for accreditation, but now if you do publish with the thinker, you'll get accredited forward by the Research Foundation. And that's again another contribution in a big way. Ben Turok, others have also started their magazines. It's something that intellectuals do, because you can then take control and really guide people's thinking and so on. Perhaps the latent educator in him. And for those of you who keenly read the thinker, you would know that it covered a vast array of critical thought and thinking. There's, of course, his interaction with youngsters, of which I was one. It's not the case anymore. But I have known ESSOP for a quarter of a century. We first met when I worked at the African National Congress head office in 1996, where, yeah, I don't have to tell you, you meet this tall, abrasive figure who speaks his mind. I mean, one of the first things, I almost fell off my chair, one of the first things, we were in an elections committee, and the late Comrade Jesse reported back of how much she had managed to, the deal she had managed to strike for the posters. And ESSOP wasn't very impressed with the price, and he says, "What kind of Indian are you? Couldn't you get a better price?" So, and I just about fell off my chair. I said, this guy. But that, as you know, was ESSOP. And of course, there were many young people crisscrossing in and out of his and Meg's house, whether it be David Bonyai, David Maimela, whether it's Busisani, whether it indeed, even though he tries to give the impression he's older than us, but the former VC of this university, Tselisi Marwala, also used to be under the thumb of ESSOP PAHAD. And he called us out, and I think what made him enjoy those interactions was that he wanted to really appreciate and understand critical new thinking, new approaches, and engage with it in a very real way. Where he disagreed, he disagreed. Where he agreed, he adapted, and he took that on. Myself and ESSOP, in particular, mulled, and Ronnie mentioned this, mulled over and argued around the national question. This was very dear to him and very passionate. The national question, and of course, it was dear to him because over time he saw what is happening with the national question within our own society and within our own organization, the ANC. And it's something that is very dear to his heart. Then there's his peers. And again, Geraldine mentioned this. We don't have to belabor the point, revolutionary giants in their own right. But people that he really saw as close and dear friends. We have comrades, but then there are those you drink with and you share your inner thoughts with. And so these are people like Thabo Mbeki, people like his brother Aziz PAHAD, Ambassador Welile, Wally Soroti, that's here, Ronnie Casserels, and many, many others. People that engaged with him argued with him, and critically contributed to understanding how do we move forward in the current conjuncture. I don't want to mention the resignation of Mavuso, but yeah, critical thought is what is required when people stray off the revolutionary path. That intellectualism also informs his solidarity credentials with Palestine, with Western Sahara, with the Cubans, etc. Something very, very close for him, and he constantly engaged in how we can actually contribute to that solidarity. One of the last debates myself and ESSOP had, and he does talk about it to a certain extent in the book, is the failure on the part of the Communist Party here in South Africa to actually give direction to an ANC that is beginning to lose its way. There was over time, whenever we were in a quagmire in the ANC and there was no way out, the Communist Party would come to our rescue with critical thinking, with some direction, whether it is how we classify our struggle in terms of colonialism of a special type, or whether we understand it that it is actually a two-stage revolution that we are engaged in, and then, of course, the path to power and the sunset clauses by Joe Slovo. These were seminal interventions from the South African Communist Party to give direction to the direction of the revolution, and ESSOP was there every step of the way. And I think that he agreed with me that indeed the Communist Party had lost its way. Finally, I must say that one of the clearest attributes of an intellectual and an academic is his or her ability to take notes. I mean, this table that David talks about, I also arrived one day at the house thinking I was going to have another glass of cheap red wine, but it was a table full of notes and books and research papers, and I was really impressed with the amount of note-taking over such a long period, from the days in exile all the way through cabinet, his time in government, and so on and so forth. I mean, it is remarkable, the amount of note-taking and the precision of the notes. So I'm not surprised, Geraldine, that he was able to quote and refer back to his notes. I'm told it's an attribute that Mbeki also has. So we are waiting for that book. Zanele, please tell him. ESSOP is indeed a public intellectual, a critical thinker, and we'll never forget him. I think that if you read this book, there were times, like all life journeys, there were times when you had a lump, and then there were times when you just laughed, and so on. So it's a very, very interesting journey that it takes you on. It's a wonderful journey, in fact, and I would really encourage you to buy it. It's not every day that you have an author that is able to tell you about 3 vantage points of fighting anti-apartheid. From the time he was young inside the country, which in itself is interesting and remarkable, the time when he was in exile, and the many chapters that he can reflect on during that period, and then indeed to have imagined that he would be able to come back and be part of the transformation project in the capacity as cabinet, as a minister, and as an all-round revolutionary. I think the book really takes you through all of those phases, and it makes for interesting reading. I know I'm going to miss him, but ESSOP indeed was and will remain an African intellectual. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. I disagree with you on the cheap wine part. I think to the end, and at this stage, I would like to thank the family personally. to open to us to the end. The last meeting with him, he asked for his best wine bottle that I had with him. And yeah, I wish everyone, those who, the book is available here, I think the family will be able to sign, and we'll invite people to have drinks and a meal. But I see Meg. Or is it? Okay. I didn't. So she'll give the vote of thanks. There she is. Meg, good timing. I'll call you to come to the stage to give a vote of thanks. Thank you very much.
I'm another person that isn't very tall, like you. Okay. Thank you. So, first of all, my family and I are so happy to see such a good turnout. And it's not just lots and lots of people, it's lots of fantastically wonderful people who I love. So thank you for coming. And we also want to thank the people who have joined us on the live streaming. Obviously, we always envisioned that ESSOP would be here with us on this day to speak about his book. And while an event like this makes us feel his absence all the more strongly, we are also grateful that through this book we can continue to hear his stories and share his experiences, and in this way continue to celebrate the full life that he lived. Most importantly, though, I must thank Professor David Monyai for his support to ESSOP in completing this work just in time before his terminal illness overtook him. The Centre for Africa-China Studies also provided us with an excellent editor in Angela McClelland, to whom we are most grateful. The University of Johannesburg is also continuing ESSOP's work through the Thinker magazine, which is now an online journal in the capable hands of Ronit Frankel. I'm very grateful to today's panel of speakers, Ronnie, Geraldine, and Oscar, are really good friends for so long, and very good comrades, and just best people I could think of. Thank you. And they managed at very short notice to squeeze this event into their busy schedule at a hectic time of the year. And I really didn't think I'd be able to persuade people of this caliber to come along, and we're so lucky. I just have to tell you, we should be very grateful to them. Our publisher is Real African Publishers, headed by Ridvan Valley, who has published numerous important books by heroes of our liberation struggle. As you will see outside this council chamber, he has also brought some copies of a great book on apartheid in Palestine by Mats Svensson, which had originally appeared in issues of The Thinker during 2010 and 2011. ESSOP persuaded Mats to have this made into a book, which he did in 2012 with the help of Ridvan and Angela. Our thanks also go to the UJ team, which has helped to organise this launch by providing the venue and much organisational assistance. Thank you to Dr. Emmanuel Matambo, sorry, I'll just go quickly, Huetsi, Zizi, and Kenzani, and also to Radia Bayat for catering, and Claudio Bollo for organising the wine. Finally, all of us would like to ask you to help us to ensure this book is read by many, many people. We shall have a few more book launches next year in Cape Town, Durban, and Joburg. But please spread the word and try to get your local bookshops to display a few copies prominently, and to order more books if they have insufficient in stock. Every one of you can help. Be a nuisance to your local bookstore. Details for obtaining e-books or ordering copies from abroad will be made available on the website of Real African Publishers. For those who are physically present, I'm happy to announce that the book is on offer here today at a special price of 350 rands, as opposed to the likely bookshop price of 450. This is something that ESSOP would have approved of. He wouldn't have had to get angry with Ridwan and wonder what was wrong with him as an Indian. So it wouldn't be right for us not to offer everyone a bargain here today. And thank you all for coming, and we hope you all enjoy reading ESSOP's book. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The books are available, and drinks, and some few stuff to eat. And we can continue conversations as we go.
Yasin.
Excuse me, can I come to Bali, please? I've been there once and I love it. You love it. It's so nice. Excuse me.
One family at a time.
I just first page about myself and my mommy, and the tears just came.
How you doing? Alhamdulillah, man. I can't complain. How's it? Hello.
It's good to see you. How are you, baby?
Congratulations. Well done.
How did you go? How are you? What you have tea?
I'm doing that 400 and something pages.
Pardon?
I'm doing that 400 and something pages.
Dave, how are you?
They have them so young these days.
You jumped in, was it you?
I'm looking at my money. I'm looking at this. maximize it. I still have so long to live. I'm sure they do. No, but I mean, I've been here, what, married forevermore. And two of my kids are there.